Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today, Tuesday, June the 6th, is HUD's Urban Development and Zoning Committee meeting. Are we good? Okay. All right. With that, I would like to have the call to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderman Cone.
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Soignier.
Present.
Alderman Browning.
Present.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Here.
We have 5 present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. I would accept the motion for the approval of the minutes for Tuesday, May 30th, 2023.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes from Tuesday, May 30th, 2023.
Second.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderman Cone.
Aye.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Soignier.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
We have 5 aye votes.
All righty, thank you. With that, we'll go to item number 1. I'd like to recognize Alderman Rasheen Aldridge on Board Bill number 28.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Let me say, this is actually the first time at the Board of Aldermen I'm presenting the bill, so
Oh,
it's
wow.
an honor to be in front of everybody. Before I start, if the clerk could read the summary of the bill, I would greatly appreciate it.
The proposed bill, Board Bill number 28, introduced by Alderman Rasheen Aldridge. The proposed bill recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment authorizing and directs the mayor and comptroller of the City of St. Louis on behalf of the city to enter into and execute an agreement with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the receipt of Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Supplemental Grant Funding, appropriating the sum of $5 million, which the city has been awarded as a Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Supplemental Grant for the Near North Side. The bill authorizes and directs the Director of Community Development Administration to contract with municipal agencies, nonprofit corporations, and other entities as necessary for the expenditure of the Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Funding.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So in the State House, we always say, like, when it's a simple bill, this is a really simple bill, and I promise you it is. So what this bill would do is basically appropriate $5 million in the Choice Neighborhood Supplemental Funds from the U.S. Housing of Urban Development that the city was awarded back in 2000, that the city was awarded in April of 2023. These funds would be used to complete the housing phase of the development that's happening in Preservation Square. These supplemental funds will be used to construct new quality mixed-use housing that ultimately, once all the housing of this multi-million-dollar project is complete, will be roughly about 675 units in the Preservation Square area. Today, I also have Ms. Rashonda from CDA to also give a little bit more history about when the city was awarded this grant and what the funds will be used for.
Thank you. Ms. Rashonda, I hate to even ask you. Come over. Okay. And then we'll need the clerk to swear you in first.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Can you provide your department and your full name?
My name is Rashonda Alexander. I'm with the Community Development Administration.
Thank you.
All right, so the Choice Neighborhood Initiative was an Obama administration initiative, and we initially received $29,500,000 in 2016 to service the neighborhoods, the people, and also housing. Housing received $20 million of that initial funding, which was used to leverage Choice Neighborhood funds, along with other things like LIHTC and the city support and tax credits, et cetera. So what happened over the course of time with rising construction costs, housing has completely skyrocketed. And our country, in particular, Secretary Fudge said our Choice Neighborhood cities need some help. So St. Louis is one of 16 cities who applied for this grant, And we received it, and it's an additional $5 million towards the supplement for housing in particular. That's basically it. Did you have any questions?
Great, yes, we will go through the committee members and see if you have any questions. Alderman Cone?
Thank you. Can you just maybe explain for the general public, choice neighborhoods, it's been around for a while, as you mentioned. Can you help identify for the folks at home, where are the choice neighborhoods in the city of St. Louis?
Yeah,
For the
thank
neighborhoods
you.
that are participating in choice neighborhoods?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Our choice neighborhood is called Preservation Square, but it's really a rectangle, if you want to be super accurate. And the four corners of Preservation Square are Carr Street, Hogan, 14th Street, and then O'Fallon. That makes up Preservation Square, which is considered the choice neighborhood for the city of St. Louis.
And then, can you also maybe break down a little bit, the $5 million, what will that be spent on specifically within Preservation Square?
Yes, the $5 million grant that we received from HUD is a supplemental for housing. The project in particular is 5 phases that are on site with Preservation Square. Phases 1 and 2 have already been completed. Phase 3 is still pending, along with phases 4 and 5. So the $5 million will directly contribute to the remaining phases 3, 4, and 5.
I don't have any further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Alderwoman Schweitzer?
Thank you very much for being here and for answering questions. Alderman Cone asked mine, so I have no further questions.
Thank you. Alderman Browning?
No further questions.
Okay, Vice Chair Sanye?
I don't have any questions. I just want to let Alderman Aldridge know you look real good up there as a first timer.
Okay, I just have one question, which I'm probably would have asked with anything like this, right? Anytime you're dealing with these kind of neighborhoods and neighborhoods that have been left out of conversations for so long, right? And making sure that we are intentional about that. And it would go for you and Alderman Aldridge to make sure, just because I don't see any in the room and I'm not sure if people are following some of the different things that are moving, but have the neighborhoods in the Preservation Square footprint continue to be in conversations about the developments going on down there?
Yes, they are continuing to be in conversations about the development in the neighborhood. Initially, to receive the award back in 2016, USI, which is Urban Strategies, held over 200 public meetings with the neighborhood to get the initial grant, and we've still been actively meeting as most recent as, was it March? This is June. So a few months ago, we had a meeting at Jefferson Elementary. So it's very imperative for us to have economic justice in the area and to engage the community. And it's also a requirement for this Choice Neighborhood Initiative grant through HUDs to engage the people as well.
Okay, thank you.
You ain't gotta move too far. I could move it over. And to jump in, so I grew up in the neighborhood where this development is happening, and my family grew up down in that neighborhood. So we have seen, I think, projects like this that has not had not just community input, but actually the community feeling like that this is a space that, or these projects would actually benefit and help them. Coming into this role as alderman, I knew that this topic is a little iffy because there has been broken promises to folks that have been told that it's going to be one thing and it's going to be another. So before I filed this piece of legislation, I met with some stakeholders in the Carr Square neighborhood to talk directly about this and to have conversation on what is the best way that not only I can move forward, but we can move forward as a community to make sure that this is done in an equitable way, but it's also done in a community-driven way. And even outside of the people who, in that meeting, I've talked to residents who currently stay in the preservation kind of phase 1 and 2 to get their opinion on how they feel about it, the people in the Murphy Park area, and ones across the street that is like those multifamily flat homes that are not part of preservation. So for me, even as I was running for office, it's critical that any piece of legislation that I have, especially knowing something that has such I think such a need to make sure that that community engagement is there. I'm taking the steps to do that, not just during this process, all the way through the board. So I have done that, and I want to continue to do that as this process moves, so the community can feel like that their voice was part of the process, even if they agree or don't always agree with the way that it's going.
Thank you so much. I think that we all have a commitment to our communities to make sure that we stand up and advocate for them as much as we can, make sure their voices are heard as much as they can. We know that these hearings are where their voices can absolutely be heard, so making sure that they even know about this part of the process, and I thank you for your intentional efforts to do that moving forward.
I appreciate that. And with Madam Chair, I would ask for consideration of the bill to be voted today.
Okay, with that, I'll accept a motion that we pass Board Bill 28 with a due pass recommendation.
So
Motion
moved.
to-
Second. Previous roll.
Right, no objections to previous roll. Congratulations, Alderman Aldridge, your board bill has passed.
Thank you so
28.
much, Madam
Your
Chair,
first
members of the
board bill,
board.
that's right, you
Yeah.
said that.
Thank you, y'all.
All right. So with that, we want to move forward with the presentation. If we're checking to see if it's okay. So we are checking to see, because we want to make sure that the public can see the presentation that SLDC has prepared for us on not only the new scoring system, but the new development processes and everything. So what we'll do now is just begin with introductions. We'll have, I know we have a great group here, and I know they're all here to celebrate Mr. Knuckles' birthday. It's like his birthday party. No, I'm serious. No, this is, the SLDC department is here, and I thank them all for taking the time out to come and not only give us this presentation, but answer questions, and I want to make sure that I'm respectful of their time. So what we'll do is have Mr. Richardson, Director, get up, and we can swear everybody in at the same time, just in case, give us introductions of everybody in the room, and hopefully by then we may be ready for the slides to be presented.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, is it okay for me to proceed?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, Madam Chairwoman and the members of the HUD's committee, I'm very honored to be before you all today to give a high-level overview of some of the changes that we've made to the incentive process to ensure that we have transparency, accountability to the public, but also providing consistency to the developers and the businesses that we're seeking to partner with as we move economic development forward in the city of St. Louis. But prior to us actually giving the overview of the incentive process, I wanted to ensure that the public was aware of exactly who SLDC is, what we stand for, and our role within the city of St. Louis. So SLDC, the St. Louis Development Corporation, is the independent economic development agency serving the city of St. Louis, Missouri. We are an action-oriented organization that exists to empower, develop, and transform St. Louis through a more vibrant, just, and growing economy where all people can thrive. As you can see within our three core pillars, economic empowerment, equitable and inclusive development, and neighborhood transformation, it's aligned with the Economic Justice Action Plan. So in October of 2022, we released the Economic Justice Action Plan, and we also reshifted our organization to reflect that. I have now three leaders, three senior vice presidents within SLDC, Mr. Lance Knuckles, who leads our neighborhood and community transformation pillar, Ms. Stacy Fowler, who leads our economic empowerment work, really spearheading our efforts with empowering small businesses and ensuring that we have the workforce of the future, working with our youth, unemployed and underemployed. And then also our equitable and inclusive development pillar. Our senior vice president that leads that area is Mr. Rob Orr, and that's where we will center most of our presentation around today, is ensuring that we are providing equitable and inclusive development across our city, but really prioritizing areas such as North St. Louis City and also areas of South St. Louis that have been historically disinvested and underserved to be able to stimulate private and philanthropic investment in those areas through public dollars. The first piece that I want to talk about around SLDC is who we are and what we stand for. We are a people-first organization, collaborative, inclusive, data-informed. We leverage equity in all the decisions that we make. We're empathetic to community voices. We hold ourselves accountable as well as our partners accountable to the agreements that we abide by, and then we are transparent in the process. So as you continue to hear much of our presentation today, you will see these core values very reflected in all of our processes. Our areas of focus at SLDC is real estate development, but also we have neighborhood and community transformation, minority and small business empowerment, and industry and business development. I would like to move actually to slide 7 that has our list of development boards that we are responsible for staffing as SLDC. So the St. Louis Development Corporation has approximately 100 employees that we leverage and utilize to provide resolutions and recommendations to these respective development boards. The Clean Energy Development Board, that's responsible for financing residential and commercial energy and renewable energy projects through the PACE program. Our Enhanced Enterprise Zone Board of the City of St. Louis recommends tax abatement for businesses that are located within the Enhanced Enterprise Zone to the Board of Aldermen. The Industrial Development Authority of the City of St. Louis issues tax-exempt revenue bonds to finance large-scale industrial and multifamily residential projects. And one that you all will get very familiar with is our Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority. So LCRA oversees many aspects of public and private real estate development in the city. We review development proposals that includes requests for public assistance in the form of tax abatement or tax-exempt revenue bonds. And ultimately, at LCRA and also all of our other SLDC boards, we work very closely with the HUD's committee. So we see the Board of Aldermen as true partners in this process. LCRA acts on behalf of the City of St. Louis, and we follow the ordinances that are ultimately passed by this committee as well as the full Board of Aldermen. And the other respective boards, from the Port Authority to LRA, LDC, the TIF Commission, and PIEA, all are responsible for leveraging and moving forward economic development activity by utilizing these tools in which we are responsible for managing at SLDC. While SLDC is not an agency of the City of St. Louis, we operate as a private corporation with a separate board of directors, and we establish our own budget. SLDC operates independently from the City of St. Louis as a legally separate corporate entity, and SLDC is not affiliated with a political party and is considered a quasi-governmental organization. The reason and rationale for this is we want to ensure that economic development activity happens that meets the needs of the community itself. And while we partner very closely with the Board of Aldermen and other governmental officials, we want to ensure that we have a nonpartisan view on how we grade these projects. And ultimately, when we bring forth the projects, it's done in a very consistent manner. So when Zach Wilson, our VP of Incentives, presents the overall incentive scorecard and the developer proposal report, what you'll see is very consistent process. So you'll get used to seeing projects scored and being led by the community benefits and not just the financial returns on a project, because it's important for us to ensure that these projects are not just adding additional revenue to our tax base, but also are meeting the respective needs of the communities in which they will be located. One nugget that I shared at the Budget and Public Employees Committee last week is that SLDC is governed by a volunteer board of directors, and we have 2 City of St. Louis aldermen, alderwomen that serve on the board of SLDC. And Madam Chairwoman, you're one of them as the chairperson of the HUD's committee, and then also the chairperson of the Budget and Public Employees Committee. We also have 6 seats from the development boards that SLDC oversees, from LRA, Port Authority, IDA, LDC, LCRA, and PIEA. And again, while SLDC is a separate nonprofit 501c4, it is important that there is accountability to the Board of Aldermen. And that's why we have Madam Madam Chairwoman Hubbard on our board of directors is to ensure that we have that accountability, have that transparency as we're making decisions to move economic development forward in the city. So what I would like to do today is pass it over to our Vice President of Incentives, Mr. Zach Wilson, to give an overview of the developer proposal report as well as the new incentive process that we will be implementing to ensure that you all can ask any questions, because you all will be ultimately the body that determines how we move these projects forward through the process and ultimately into ordinances that SLDC and LCRA and our other respective development boards are responsible for implementing. So with that, I'll pass it to Mr. Zach Wilson.
All right, thank you so much. And before we go to Mr. Wilson, I want to make sure for the public again to know that we were really trying to get these slides up to be viewed while they were speaking. It didn't quite work out, so they have said that they will post an additional link with these slides on it and post it also with this recording, rather, of this meeting. So thank you for your patience with that.
And if you need any other further documentation, we're always willing to share that information with the public as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Do I have to be sworn in or anything like that?
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I got actually two other speakers here. Can you raise your hand?
And I'll go at once.
Good afternoon. I usually hate following Neil because it's a nightmare. So thank you, sir. My name is Zach Wilson. I'm with SLDC. I've been with SLDC for about 8 years. I'm going to give a brief history here before I pass off to two people in my department. I was recently promoted to SLDC and to the incentives, head of incentives about 2 years ago. A few months after that, we signed a contract with Baker Tilly USA. It's a firm that does financial work with the municipalities across the country. In that contract, we assess the current processes and incentive processes that we administer through SLDC. We engage with leaders, the community, and developers to find what was working and not working. Also, we looked across the country what other cities were doing and what they were not doing. After engagement and assessment, a new process was developed. The major new piece of this process was community scorecard. And with this community scorecard, we moved it up to the top of the process. Most communities moved it back in the back where there's not much teeth to it. We also did neighbor engagement, and that was for all projects over $1 million, excuse me, all projects over $1 million, we insist on neighbor engagement before you bring to our boards. We have two packets here. This first packet will go through the neighborhood scorecard, the community scorecard, and financial scorecard. And this second packet will go through what we will include on all redevelopment plans moving forward. I got Andrew Knopp and Jake Nierup here to speak on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, committee members. Should I get myself sworn in?
Just swearing everybody that's in the room, just in case.
Do you swear to or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay.
All right, so I will be talking a little bit, it'll be a little bit repetitive for what Zach just went over, but talking about our incentive reform process and then the community benefits scorecard, which I have kind of become the person that does the scoring for our projects. So hopefully you're following along the slides. I think in some cases it might be useful to be looking at the slides while I talk. So as Zach said, it's kind of been a couple-year process where we, although what we heard from the community and others, had maybe even gone back further. So a couple of themes emerged from things that people were telling us. One is that incentives should be a tool for public benefit and not just a financial gap filler for developers. And then kind of on the other side of things, developers as well as the public desired a clear, predictable method of incentive evaluation. So what we did, as Zach mentioned, was we contracted Baker Tilly to assess our financial model, develop the community benefits scorecard, and create a new process of incentive evaluation for us. So the results of that were they received, and we as well received extensive feedback from developers, the Board of Aldermen, public schools, CDCs, neighborhood groups, PDA, and many others. And then from the results of that, we have a new incentive process, slightly different from before. We have a newly tweaked financial model, but substantially similar. We have a new fiscal analysis report that we can provide to the public that kind of gives context and more narrative forms of the financial analysis, and then the community benefits scorecard. And then going forward, we hope to continue to improve our processes. We're going to evaluate the community benefits scorecard and hopefully evolve it periodically over time to make sure it's doing what it's intended to do. And then in general, we hope to become more transparent, digital, and accountable. So I'm going to go on to the process slide, which shows on the right side a process overview. So this is basically linear for how our process will work. Many of these pieces are not different. What's different is that after someone applies, the first step is that they're scored according to the community benefits scorecard, and they must meet a minimum threshold to get to the next stage, which includes fiscal analysis, developer vetting, negotiations happen. As Zach mentioned, we've kind of codified now neighborhood engagements. There has to be some level of engagement for projects over $1 million. And then what I might also point out too is that at the very end, our reporting and compliance has always kind of been required, but we've now hired a new person to kind of beef up that and make sure we're more successful at doing those things. All right, so now on to the community benefits scorecard. On the left side, I've got just kind of bullet points of what I think that it achieves. Kind of to reiterate, it puts community benefits first. That's the first thing. A project needs to have some level of benefit to the community before it moves any further. It's hopefully clear and predictable, and it allows developers to kind of preemptively score things themselves and maybe tweak their project accordingly if they're not going to get to the level of abatement they think they desire. It communicates more of the why projects should happen, kind of a story behind it. If it provides affordable housing and good transit access and kind of revitalizes areas that need it, it gives us more of that kind of softer reason why projects should happen. It's a menu of options, so there are certain categories that basically are location dependent, but there's also categories that allow a developer to make a community benefits contribution or add affordable housing into their residential project to get to the level of incentive they desire. It hopefully incorporates planning principles and values, and it also complements other initiatives. So our own economic justice action plan, MetroLink expansion, there's a category that will include basically supporting development around those new stations if that ends up happening. The neighborhood planning efforts will incorporate more directly the scorecard into it. And then it establishes a ceiling. So there's 3 tiers, which you can see on the right. You have to get a minimum of 30 points to even be considered for incentives, but then there's tiers above that, which allow for higher levels of incentive and for longer duration. And it should just be pointed out that those are ceilings, and then we use the financial analysis to kind of dial in on a specific amount. And then at the very end of this list, you got a community benefits agreement in all caps, because if a developer basically accepts a certain score, we write those categories into the redevelopment agreement, and that becomes a community benefits agreement that they must abide by. Next slide, I have the residential scorecard and the mixed-use scorecard here. There's also a commercial scorecard, but the mixed-use scorecard includes the categories in that as well. So, and then not to go through all these, but you can see that there's varying levels of points. I have a few categories kind of starred for different reasons. They're not necessarily more important than others, but like one, for example, is the geography. So as part of the Economic Justice Action Plan, the consultant indexed the entire city based upon need and opportunity and created a economic justice index from 1 through 5. And that category awards points for those areas. So essentially more disinvested areas can receive more points just by projects happening there. We also encourage basically transit access, affordable housing, and then my personal favorite, commercial corridors, to try to get housing built around commercial corridors, and also mixed-use development to happen on corridors to kind of create those and strengthen those assets for our city, as well as, not just points for jobs, but quality jobs that provide benefits, and as well as incentivizing our target industries like advanced manufacturing, geospatial, ag tech, et cetera. So then the next slide, I'll just quickly I just put these in here to show that, categories, some of them are basically a yes, no, and you either get the points or you don't. Some have kind of varied levels of points that you can receive. So transportation access and affordable housing are two of those. With affordable housing in particular, there's different levels of affordability a project can provide. And so, basically the deeper and more concentrated you provide affordable housing, the more points you'll receive. Last slide for me, the desired outcomes of the community benefits scorecard are that we hope development patterns change to emphasize underinvested areas. We've always kind of tried to achieve that, but hopefully this continues to really make that happen. We hope to mold developments to include more benefit to the community, and just because of that, generally cultivate an environment of good, responsible development throughout the city, while continuing to spur investment, and doing this all in such a way that creates more true public-private partnerships rather than SLDC being viewed as kind of a transaction as a part of their capital stack. And then the kind of bigger picture outcome, we hope that we're shifting the paradigm around incentives to, once again, not just be about filling financial gaps and worrying about giving too much benefit or money to developers, but more thinking of this as an investment tool where the city achieves and gets what we want from the developers, and they also are happy to because they make projects happen. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jake and let him talk about the numbers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name's Jake Narup. I'm a financial analyst for SLDC. I've been here for a couple years, and I think I've worked with many of you virtually, but it's nice to see you in person. So as Andrew mentioned, the community benefits scorecard has kind of been the primary change to our incentive process through working with Baker Tilly. But parallel to that process, we were also making tweaks to our fiscal impact model that we've been using since about 2017. So my predecessor created that model before my time here, and it's a fairly complex Excel workbook, but the goal was pretty simple, and that's just to estimate and try to get our arms around new tax revenue that would be generated as a result of a real estate program being built. So the main piece of that is new real estate taxes, but we also capture personal property taxes, retail sales, payroll and earnings taxes, parking taxes, all of those things, and we project them over time and compare them to the baseline revenues that that parcel or parcels are generating currently. So the model itself creates an operating pro forma, and so we take all of the developers' projections, we make our own adjustments to them, make kind of reasonable expectations for expenses as well to get to a net operating income, which is an NOI, and then we can apply a cap rate to that to estimate what an appraiser would see this project is worth, and then we can get to that estimate of what taxes would be compared to the base. We estimate a developer's return. This is kind of the lever that we use to turn incentives up and down. This is an imperfect science, but the way our model works is we assume a property is held for 10 years and then sold at market value, and that's the developer's return. We can make that estimate with the incentive and also without. So the incentive, in this case, primarily tax abatement, is not an infusion of capital, it's not a grant, it's just a reduction in expenses. And when you reduce expenses, you increase NOI, so that makes the property more valuable. So we can essentially estimate what this property is worth with the incentive attached and what without, and then we use that as a backstop to keep from over-incentivizing projects. So we use market data from all over the country. We have Midwest data, we have St. Louis data, and we can look at what those reasonable rates are depending on what the proposed use is and in what part of the city. So there is no one-stop return that's the ceiling for a project. It depends on where the project is and what the type of real estate program is. Some projects are riskier than others. We allow higher returns. Some projects are safer, and we would want a lower return on that project. I think it's a good reminder to everyone that base taxes are frozen during the abatement process, and a portion of incremental taxes are always collected. So in no case ever are taxes actually reduced as a result of an incentive process. And I would say, I kind of forgot to mention earlier, but there is no one-size-fits-all model for developer return. Our model is very much keyed towards mixed-use projects, multifamily projects. When we get into owner-occupied industrial uses and stuff like that, there really is no developer return. At its core, our model is a real estate model, and if the value of the real estate is a manufacturer's ability to produce more of an object, that's not something that we can necessarily capture. And then we would lean more on our community benefit scorecard, and we do frequently harass the assessor to make sure we are being reasonable in all of our expectations for these projects. Mr. Knopp also mentioned, but parallel to all this stuff, we've hired a new compliance manager, Ms. Madeline Swanstrom, who's sitting over here, in our attempt to kind of not only make sure that our developers are adhering to the terms of the redevelopment agreements, but also to be a little more proactive down the road and have some backwards-looking analysis to look at the projects that we incentivized, the impacts that we projected for those projects, and then what was actually kind of collected on the back end. So full disclosure, I was hired to do that 2.5 years ago, but then we lost like 3 people in our department, so roles change. But at that point, I think I would defer to Mr. Richardson for any, or Mr. Wilson for any closing comments, and then I'm sure we'll take questions as well.
I'd like to go through this packet real quick because you'll be seeing this from all board bills coming from SLDC, mostly for tax abatement and TIF. First page is basically a table of contents. The page number 1 is the project summary, basically the cost versus what number of units are going to our commercial space. Page 2 goes into the applicant's history. This one is RISE, so it's a lengthy narrative. And page 3 and 4 is the other developments the developer has done in the past, and it gives a little synopsis of everything they've done in the past. And page 5, it shows you what step in the process this is. So they already went through the application and the LCRA board, so this next step is the Board of Aldermen. A lot of people think after the Board of Aldermen, the project will get abatement. That is not true. We have to designate the developer, then they have to follow MWB compliance. If they do all those things, then the tax abatement is activated. A lot of times, projects are still completed, but we do not activate tax abatement because MWB is not met. So page 6 just shows you the community scorecard and where they scored at. Page 7 is what the SLDC staff recommended, and then what the board, LCRA, PIE, or EEZ approved or supported, and the resolution number. Then pages 8, 9, and 10 are the economic analysis, and page 11 is the letters of support. This one, please don't get used to this many letters of support because this is a very good project. We would expect maybe 2 or 3 at most, but this was a very robust project that checked a lot of boxes. And number 12 is the SLDC conflict of interest form, which I will be signing mostly, or anybody else that touches an application. So be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
I'm going to open it up for questions from my colleagues, but first, because I know how this is, especially when we don't have the slides in front of us and the public doesn't. You all did say what LCRA is, but let's go back and make sure that everyone understands what MWBE is.
Minority compliance.
And just want to speak just a little to that, of what the,
Every incentive project has to meet minority compliance. It's 24% minority, and then 11% women. Firms have to be awarded contracts through construction for each project.
all right.
And just to speak to that, you know, Madam Chairwoman, there's 3 ordinances that I definitely want to call to the attention of this body as well as the public. We have Ordinance 70767. That really states the requirements to meet the women and minority-owned business enterprise goals for each one of those projects. 71094 speaks to prevailing wage as well as the residency goals that each project must meet. And then most recently, 71620 was just passed this last session around the developer proposal report. So we did codify that language to ensure that the developer proposal report was consistent when we shared it with the Board of Aldermen and their respective bodies there. So those various ordinances are obviously public and people can see that. And also what we do within LCRA, before we assign the developer to the project, we enter and negotiate the redevelopment agreement. So the redevelopment agreement is really what sets the requirements and the partnership between LCRA and that respective developer. So ensuring that they meet all of the various ordinances as well as the community benefits that were agreed on or agreed to prior to us entering into that agreement. And so that's how we are legally able to claw back any incentives if the developer does not meet those goals and hold them accountable through the process. As was spoken to in the presentations, tax abatement is not awarded once LCRA enters into that redevelopment agreement. We ensure that the developer actually meets all of the requirements within that redevelopment agreement, and then there's a letter that's sent from LCRA and SODC to the assessor's office to actually activate that abatement. In some instances, that may take 2 to 3 years for that construction to be complete and for us to verify that all of the standards within that agreement were met. So I just wanted to ensure that you all were aware and also the public was aware that there's a lengthy process for abatement to actually be activated for a particular project.
All right, thank you very much. All right, Alderman Cone.
Thank you. I know I've had a kind of back and forth with the president's office about the scorecard, and I know they've been communicating with SLDC actually about this specific scorecard since myself and Alderwoman Spencer at the time, and now Alderwoman Saunier. This development project is predominantly in our wards. One of the questions that came up during that discussion, I'll call it, the transportation access. So the way that transportation access is graded, for example, you've got 3 points if it's within a quarter mile or less from a bus stop, 5 points, and then it changes the criteria. So, it's 3 points if it's a quarter mile or less from a bus stop, and then it's 5 points if it's a quarter mile or less from Grand 70. And then it's 7 points if it's a half mile or less from an existing Metrolink, station. And then it has optional underneath those kind of primary criteria, but it doesn't say what the value is associated with that. So this project, it got, I think, 5 out of 9 points for transportation because it's a quarter of a mile or less from the Grand 70 bus stop. Didn't get any additional points if it was a quarter mile or less from a bus stop, because the Grand 73 or the local 73 also runs through that area as well. It's also fairly close, but I'd have to figure out the actual distance to, where it falls within the new North-South Metrolink expansion as well. But why isn't it that these are the same going across the board, and then the optional or the additional criteria going down?
Yeah. So that may be slightly confusing potentially, but basically we chose the point levels to be, the basic is being within a quarter mile of a bus stop, and then you could be within half a mile of a Metrolink stop.
But I think you just hit the nail on the head by saying the basic criteria. So it's not a basic criteria across the board.
Yeah, and so we're basically trying to accomplish a lot of things. We want to be very close to bus stops because those provide some level of transit access.
I am all about TOD, all about it. But I think we need to be fair in how we're assessing projects across the board. And the way I'm reading it, and feel free to, I'm just trying to share some perspective here. So a project would get 7 points if it's in half a mile of an existing Metrolink. There is nothing in North St. Louis that's within a half mile of an existing Metrolink. There's nothing in Southeast City that's within half a mile of an existing Metrolink. But then under that, as optional, it says kind of the two other qualifiers before. So does it have to be both of those qualifiers, or one of those qualifiers, all three of those qualifiers? What exactly is that? Because the way this is ranked, it's 5 out of 9 points because of where it ranks within that first classification.
Right.
But it might also fall into, so where does the optional how are those ranked? How are those?
Optional essentially means that it wouldn't need to meet the other lower point level categories in order to still be able to get the 7 or the 9 points.
So essentially, anything in the central corridor or downtown where there's an existing Metrolink station.
Right, exactly. And so that
would get 7 points versus something in North City that has a bus stop
and
more than a quarter mile.
hopefully by trying to prioritize and rewarding the most points for the North-South Metrolink expansion, we're doing 2 things with that. One, being able to provide access to people in the more residential areas in North City that need it, obviously, and as well as parts of South City, and also encouraging transit-oriented development around what that new route would be to hopefully make that new route then more successful as well. So it's kind of a tricky thing to accomplish everything, but hopefully that does achieve some.
And I support that, you know, again, fully support transit-oriented development. I'm trying to still work with Metro on, you know, the implementation of North-South Metrolink, you know, would like to see it go slightly further into Dutchtown, you know, where they have it cut off right now. It makes absolutely no sense for just the infrastructure alone. But what I'm hearing, though, is, so you're prioritizing existing Metrolink and North-South Metrolink. North-South Metrolink, in many respects, makes sense, particularly in North City, South St. Louis, not as much in the central corridor. But then that's literally only the eastern half of the city. There's still areas in Northwest City that aren't going to be near an existing line or the North-South Metro line. So how I mean, to be fair, the rankings on here, if you score 50 points or more, you're going to get awarded pretty much the full allotment of incentives, which all of North St. Louis basically automatically gets a 50-point score. So noted, like all of North St. Louis is automatically going to qualify. I'm just trying to understand the rankings for this specific category because I want more transit-oriented development, but bus stops are just as important as light rail.
I would say 2 things to speak to your question, Alderman Cone. The first is, as we were creating the scorecard, we took into in consideration the actual location and the demographics and the geography of each parcel, of each neighborhood. And so as we develop the Economic Justice Index, to your point, if it's not, you know, next to a transit-oriented development project currently or bus line, we took into consideration that within the actual Economic Justice Index and what they qualify in those other buckets to account for that. And so it would not say that, you know, we're taking anything away from projects that are not located next to a transit-oriented transit line. Ultimately, what we were doing was trying to think through the rubric around how do we award incentives to areas that have been disproportionately impacted, disinvested, and prioritizing that first and foremost. And then projects that are in the central corridor and downtown, we want to promote points and opportunities for projects to be closer to those transit areas. And what that does is allow easier access for individuals to visit or be employed at those developments that's happening in the economic engine of our city, which is downtown and the central corridor right now. We want to continue to see that to grow, and in order to do that, we've incentivized, to your point, areas in North St. Louis City and Southeast, and the Economic Justice Index 1 and 2 areas as a top priority, even without being connected or close to a transit line. So they already qualify, as you spoke to, but it was giving additional consideration to projects that are in a central corridor to incentivize them to be closer to transit so individuals can have greater access to those development projects.
So along with the, I'm losing my place here with the different proposals. So with the disclosure here, thank you, Mr. Wilson, for, there you are, signing that. I was under the impression, and there were a couple changes to Board Bill 64 as we were going through this, so forgive me if my memory is failing me here, but I thought we also had a requirement that any board member also provided a disclosure. So LCRA board that reviewed this would also have to have their disclosures.
I will look into that. If that's the case, we can add those.
Okay. Again, there was a lot of changes, going through that, but I thought we also were requiring that as a condition of Board Bill 64. I just pulled it up. I'm going through it, but I'm also trying to be present as well. So, and then lastly, since this is kind of related to Board Bill 64, the transparency component of that, having meetings posted online, is all of that worked out now?
All of it's, yeah, we've been posting all of our board meetings from SLDC, and all of our respective development boards are now recorded and posted online for the public to view at their convenience.
Wonderful. All right. That's all the questions that I had. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Slicer?
Thank you so much for being here and for this presentation. This is so much better than what we used to get. So first of all, just thank you for that. I think that's a huge movement forward, and I think all of this is what I think we want to see. So I have a few kind of nitty-gritty specific questions. One in particular on, they're not, page, the community benefits scorecard page, where it goes through 80, 90, 90. Why were those percentages chosen versus like capping at 75%, which I know has been something people have discussed?
Tier 2, 1090 and 550, that was the basis we do for LIHTC projects, that we reward that for all LIHTC projects. That's why we kept it at Tier 2 like that.
Okay.
10 and 80 is not far from 75, so we thought, that was the cap though. So
Sure.
That's the ceiling. So if we think they deserve less, we can always come down.
And that's interesting with how that relates to the score and coming, what, do you imagine that a developer would say, but we got 39 points, we should get the maximum 80%. How do those conversations happen? I'd love to know more about that.
We have those conversations already.
Sure.
Yeah, so we, basically, the rate of return is maybe higher than we expect, so that's why we would reduce the amount of abatement. So that's the scorecard, community scorecard sets the ceiling, then the financial scorecard kind of narrows down to what percentage we were looking at.
Okay. And the 89, those percentages you feel pretty sure about that those are the max that you want?
Correct, yes. And to be honest, a tier 5, anything at 25 years would definitely have to be North City or a major project like Cleveland High School, something along those lines.
Cleveland High School is music to our ears here in South City. Don't say that too loud. What's going on? The score sheet, the mixed use on the next page, the residential score sheet, the mixed use score sheet, similar kind of question. How were those specific max point numbers chosen? Obviously, to prioritize geography and affordable housing, that's very clear because those are so much bigger than everything else. But then between 5 and, I think the lowest here we have 2 points, tell me a little bit more about those numbers.
Yeah, so it was really trying to calculate and understand based on historical data on all of the projects that we've seen that received incentives previous to us actually putting a scorecard in place, as well as Baker Tilly, who we partner with to develop the scorecard, looked at other practices from across the country to get the best standards as to what would be the appropriate level of points to award for every AMI level, for example, as it relates to affordable housing. And so what we aim to do was to have incentivize greater points for access to lower income families or residents to ensure that they had access to these projects, specifically those that are happening in the EJI 4 and 5 areas, which is our downtown and central corridor. We want to see more housing affordability in those areas. So we wanted to over-incentivize those units to be built. And what we've seen as a challenge is for developers, even if they have the low-income housing tax credit award, is to be able to make those units accessible to those that are at 30% AMI or below, because the actual rents that they receive for those units are lower. And so in order to ensure that the project financially is feasible, we have to provide greater incentive to provide that community benefit. And so based on that calculus, that's how we determine those numbers, based on the anticipated rental amounts and rental incomes that were received at the various levels, whether it's 30% AMI, 60% AMI, or 80% AMI, or the area median income. And so that's kind of how we calculated that. And then they also get incentives, increase the number of points per the number of units that are created for each one of those brackets.
Right, and I do appreciate that it says max possible points, so that there's certain projects, if it's 80% AMI, for example, you're going to get lower amounts of points. 50 is the highest possible that you could possibly get.
That's correct. And one thing I do want to clarify for this board, and I think it's very important for you all to understand, is that when SODC or LCRA puts forth a recommendation for abatement, it's simply that, a recommendation, right? And so you all have, as the HUD's committee, and the Board of Aldermen, to ultimately adjust that recommendation through the process. And so if you find things to say, hey, this doesn't really match up with our vision for this neighborhood or the community based on that feedback through the process, you can adjust that down. And so ultimately what LCRA abides by is the ordinance that's passed by the Board of Aldermen. And so through the process, if we recommend 75% tax abatement over 10 years for a particular project, you all can recommend and say, hey, based on community feedback and other input, we believe this project is financially feasible and can add enough benefit at 50% of the tax abatement level. And then that ultimately is put into the ordinance. And what that does for LCRA is set a max for the level of tax abatement that we can offer to that developer through the redevelopment agreement. And so even if you come back and say, hey, we want to provide 90% AMI, or 90% abatement for a certain period, or 75% abatement, that sets the cap for LCRA, and we can always go lower if we determine, based on the market conditions and the negotiation with that developer, that we should move it lower. So we're always acting under the ordinances and direction of the Board of Aldermen.
Right, that makes sense. And this goal is standardization.
Exactly.
Of what we're seeing, and then we can say, you chose 5 points when you could have chose 9. Why?
Exactly. Yep.
And then at a certain point, you might say, well, this project is just not going to happen without this. This is where we're at.
Exactly right. And so usually in a HUD's committee meeting and a hearing, we have it open for public comment as well as a developer to come and speak about their project itself. And so that's a time where this committee and others can ask questions directly of the developer around the various scores and the various components of that development project itself.
This is great, thank you. Let's see, I had a few more, I think. Let's see, where did I put my note here? I may have lost my last question. which case we can just move on. Yeah, I've lost my last question, so hopefully someone else asks it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And it might come back to you, just let
Maybe,
us
we'll
know. She gave us a good segue to, when you were explaining and answering her question, and thought about the infamous but-for question that we ask all the time. So that's
Yeah.
that's the rules behind the but-for and this process. So Alderman Browning, did you have any questions?
Yes, so SLDC recently implemented neighborhood managers. I was wondering if you could speak a little more to their role and what they're supposed to do for the city in these neighborhoods that they cover.
Yeah, so that's been a hot button question. So I think we should make sure that the public has more of that information readily available as well. So we'll be sure to do that. But overall, the neighborhood manager is the face of SLDC in all 79 neighborhoods. So we've hired 10 neighborhood managers to work with the community-based organizations, the CDCs, as well as the businesses and the residents in those various neighborhoods to ensure that we are being responsive to their needs at SLDC, but then also to ensure that we are communicating to the public all of the programs, initiatives, and priorities that have been set from an economic development perspective through the city of St. Louis and through the St. Louis Development Corporation. One of the unique pieces around the Project Connect area, the 6 neighborhoods surrounding NGA, is our neighborhood managers are actually supporting the planning process. And through that, as we begin to implement the neighborhood plans that are community-driven, one of the areas within the scorecard is being able to adjust some of the numbers and the figures to actually meet the community needs and the feedback from the community based on the plans that they submit to the Planning and Urban Development Agency. So that's the role of the neighborhood managers, is to really be the voice and the face of SLDC, but also be the voice and the face of the residents and businesses and the stakeholders as we're making decisions around allocating resources and also the type of development projects that we are prioritizing for these respective communities and neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. And what concerns, if you have any, that have come up since the implementation of the scorecard? Have you identified any concerns with that so far? Are you looking to make changes in the future as the city's needs change?
Yeah, so again, as I spoke to, that I think the great thing about this community benefit scorecard is we can change it over time to reflect the needs of not just the city as a whole, but each neighborhood as we get more feedback around what are the things that they want to prioritize in their community and in their neighborhoods, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's grocery stores, whether it's industrial development. SLDC can adjust this scorecard to incentivize projects that aligns with the plans of those respective neighborhoods. So that's a unique component of the scorecard. And I'll let Zach speak to some of the feedback that we've received from developers as well as the residents and businesses as it relates to the scorecard overall.
Then we're probably going to, in probably a couple months, kind of look overall how the projects have scored and maybe adjust a couple of tiers. But so far, we there's a sustainability officer about to be hired from the planning department. And once that person comes on board, we'll have that a scoring category for them to put their input on too. So those are the things that we're looking forward to. So, the feedback has been pretty positive, to be honest with it. The public and the developers agree on one thing: they need transparency and they need to know what the process is. And this spells this out, and everyone's on board for that. So.
Thank you. I do appreciate the standardization of the process, taking it out of the hands of the Board of Aldermen and making sure that we are being consistent across wards and across the city. I think that's a great improvement, and I'm a fan. Last question I have is about developer vetting. Now, the slide that we received, I'm just going to read it for the public since that's not available. It says SLDC will evaluate developers based on previous projects, compliance with previous development agreements, and will ensure that at a minimum, developers have no outstanding tax liabilities for previous projects. Can you speak a little more to what kind of things you're looking at when you're vetting developers, and what kind of things would disqualify someone from receiving tax abatement?
problem properties, back taxes, nuisance properties, well, problem properties, nuisance, the same thing, but also a track record with the minor compliance that is up to par. That's a major issue with us. A lot of times we probably not even process the application all the way through, we just cut it off as soon as possible, because we don't want to waste anybody's time.
And what I would say is one of the things that we've noticed with the developer vetting requirement is we look at all of the previous projects that the developer may have led, whether it's with that company or another company, because we know a lot of these developers many times change names. So we follow the actual owners of those various entities. And as Zach spoke to, we will not even engage in a conversation or entertain an application from that party until they've met the previous obligations of those redevelopment agreements. And we are having conversations right now with developers who may be falling short on some of those requirements. And we've advised them and already articulated that we will not review their application until they meet the requirements, because these incentives are not an entitlement, they're a benefit. And we have to be good stewards of how we manage that process. And so we are, again, ensuring that redevelopment agreements are being abided by, and it's going to have ramifications on future projects that developer brings forth to the city.
Okay, that's good to hear. I think we all agree that when the city is investing in these things, that there needs to be some accountability and some level of quality that's ensured, since we are not aiming to hurt ourselves in the process. That all sounds good. Again, big fan of the scorecard and looking forward to seeing it play out and change in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to Vice Chair, I'd like to circle back to Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I remembered my question. So for the affordable housing points, is that dependent on how long the units will be affordable, or are these affordable, perpetuity, or do they sunset? How is it dependent on the project?
Usually with LIHTC, it's a 15-year period. That's why we match the tax abatement for that amount of time. So it really depends on the program they're awarded. So that's why we match it with the amount of tax abatement.
Right. I imagine there are projects I know there are projects that are funded in the city that are affordable they're affordable now, their plan is to be affordable in 10, 20, 30 years. That's the goal of the project. That doesn't receive any more points, or it's a max of 50, so maybe it would.
It could. We would have to do more compliance on those type of projects that are not receiving a specialized tax credit, because usually the state monitors those type of programs. If we give a tax abatement of affordable housing that's not receiving tax credits, we would have to monitor that project.
Interesting.
So that's
How often is that the case, that they're not receiving state credits for their affordable housing?
Well, it really depends on the area the units are in. So some areas can't charge higher rents, so that's basically some parts of the city are affordable just by market rate, so in those sections. But moving forward, we haven't had many of those applications come in like that, though.
Right.
So, yeah.
Just interesting. I know that, we worry, I think, about when apartments and units stop being affordable and go to market rate, and how that's going to affect folks. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Vice Chair Sanye.
Hello. First, I just want to thank you all for coming today. I'm on the Budget Committee as well, so I know you guys have been busy trying to give us the information that, is useful to us. And I know technically you all are, a private entity, so I appreciate you guys coming to Budget, and it helps me to kind of get clear. I have a couple of questions about things, and some are really just, I always take notice of just like, if you're at home and you don't do this type of work every day, sometimes the language in itself can be inaccessible to you and hard to understand. So some of it I just want to talk about. I noticed where it says neighborhood engagement, that it says it may be required. Like it doesn't say that it's absolutely required. So I'm just curious about the circumstances in which it may not be required, or how we go about gauging that aspect.
What we put on internally is a requirement of under $1 million. We don't require that, but over $1 million, we require at least some type of support letter of some sort. So It depends on the size of the project.
Okay. And then also, and this is before, this is a not exactly this, but I noticed, I think a lot of people are familiar with LCRA. I think that comes out a lot. I think what a lot of people don't know as much about or hear about as much about is PEIA. Can you all just talk about a little bit those two project differences?
It's basically, it's like LCRA's cousin. LCRA was basically done for commercial and residential. PIA was mostly industrial. So it's basically the same, similar, it provides tax abatement. It could even eminent domain. We seldom do eminent domain, but it's mostly an industrial form of tax abatement.
Okay. I also wanted to, it is a little similar to Alderman Cohn's point earlier. I really like the scorecard in the development because I think, this is a huge step for our city, and I think it says something that we haven't had something like this before, but I'm glad for new leadership that brings this about. And I love that public transit is even considered because often we don't talk about the connection between housing and our transit system, and then you just end up with kind of hodgepodge systems and things are not connected and as accessible for our folks. So I'm glad to see that in there. I know at the end you even have, and one thing, even in conversations I've had with you all, you always lift up, hey, this is a living, breathing process. So nothing is permanent, everything can be fixed. So I definitely think, it would be worthwhile to look into Alderman Cohn's point and maybe taking a more robust look, especially since we are going to be investing so much money into our transit system. How do we make sure that that is connected to our housing, and particularly our affordable housing, and particularly areas that are often kind of separated and left in a silo? One of the things I think I've observed is there's poverty and then there's like isolated poverty. And I think, there are areas in our communities that the isolated poverty has a lot to do with the disconnection between affordable housing and our transit systems. I also had a question about, it says quality jobs. I was just curious about how do we define quality jobs?
It's a pay rate. Jake, what was our?
So there's a livable wage that has to be, that's like codified out, so it's an external source of that wage rate. You have to either be a certain level of pay per hour or another level and also providing benefits. And then you get those points in that category if 80% of your jobs meet that requirement. It's not just one or two. It's got to be like substantially providing quality jobs.
So technically you could have some where all your jobs don't have to, well, I guess prevailing wage would kick in. They would all need to, okay. And then I also have a question as far as quality jobs go. Does SLDC give projects that employ union labor a higher score, or how is that factor just tracked across projects submitted to SLDC?
I guess you, go ahead.
I mean, unless I'm wrong about this, we don't currently, but like you've brought up and like we've been thinking about, we're happy to take feedback like that and consider it for, but I wonder if minority compliance or something.
Yeah, so in the prevailing wage ordinance 71094, it has some requirements around the wage. It doesn't have a restriction on do we hire from the union specifically, but there is a prevailing wage number that needs to be met during the construction period, as well as tracking the number of apprentices that are on the site. And so we want to promote more apprentices actually being on the job site, because that's how our overall workforce is going to grow. So there are some requirements around apprentices as well as residency requirements, because we also want to incentivize projects to actually work with residents, hire residents from the city of St. Louis on these projects. So those are all within the, again, the ordinance 71094.
Okay, thank you. And then this is maybe a little bit more of a general question for you all. Do you feel, I know we've recently had a lot of legislation last season, do you feel like there's more work to do as far as a board of aldermen to, I think you all are just a group of great leaders, and I think that's excellent when we have phenomenal leaders that care about equity and care about all of St. Louis, especially, areas that have been historically disinvested in on the north side and on the south side. But then, politics in the city, my concern is, things can change, the people in the seats and the positions are changed. Do you feel confident that we have enough of this process kind of codified and put into law, where it's policies and systems and not just based off of the people who are in the seat having the will to do it.
Yeah, I think that's one testament to Alderman Cone and now President Green is moving forward with Board Bill 64 in last session, was to codify a lot of the developer proposal report and the information that's required from SLDC and LCRA, holding us accountable. So when we present projects, they're done in a consistent basis, and any changes to those requirements would require a amendment to those board bills and those ordinances, which would raise question and obviously provide opportunity for public comment to be provided to ensure that it reflects the appropriate process. So I would say today, we are in a great position to move things forward, but always willing to have additional conversations and discussions with the Board of Aldermen to ensure that we are living up to the standard in which our purpose statement states.
Thank you. And then also, when I was looking through this, and even for things that have conversations started in the ward that I have the honor of representing, I noticed that you guys actually have a spot that evaluates the impacts on the school district. I love that. I was on the Board of Education before this. They have a strong relationship, and I think they're just often not even considered when these processes take place, even though they absolutely have a large, stake in this. So even in a project, when you can see the existing school taxes versus the projected school taxes, I think that will help a lot of folks in the public and families understand necessarily all development is not bad, and a lot of it can be good, but having a place where you can go to get that analysis, a consistent criteria is really helpful for that. And then I wanted to comment, following up on Alderman Browning's point about the neighborhood managers. Mine is excellent. I told you that in Budget Committee, but she is, we talk all the time. We're working on some things together to help some small businesses in the area. She's very resourceful. I think Lisa Otik?
Aki.
Yep. Yes, she's very resourceful. She responds quickly. And then I guess I had another question too, and I'm sure we will talk about this more. I see a lot of references to the Economic Justice Index 1 versus 2. So could you explain for folks who are at home, what is that? Just giving some background and context on what that is, and I see it has a strong relationship with geography, which makes sense, but I just want to make sure people at home understand.
I'm trying to find the map, but what we really wanted to prioritize through the Economic Justice Index was to ensure that we are taking not just the current conditions of a community into play, but also understanding the historical injustices that are happening from redlining to racial covenants, to also our unoccupied lots and vacancy, and taking those things into consideration. And so as we're looking at the Economic Justice Index, there's two indicators. One is the indicators of need, and the other is the indicators of opportunity. If we don't have the slides up already, I can go into it really quickly. Indicators of needs is the areas that were redlined according to the Homeowners Loan Corporation maps, contains a high number of unoccupied lots. Is the unemployment rate high? Or the residents predominantly African-American or marginalized communities or population? Is the area in a HUD qualified census tract? And for purposes and context for the public, HUD qualified census tract is an area that has over 50% of the geography is actually at 60% AMI or below, or have a poverty rate of 25% or more. So that's what determines the HUD qualified census tract. As we've stated here several times, all of North City is deemed a HUD qualified census tract, the majority of it, and then areas in Southeast such as Gravois Park and Dutchtown also fall within the qualified census tract. Indicators of opportunity. Is there a commercial corridor with ongoing construction activity? Is there opportunity zone or historic district or opportunity sites present? Does the area contain grassroots organizations like a CDC, a Community Development Corporation? Is there existing special business district, community improvement district, tax increment financing district, or a transportation development district? And so we are prioritizing areas that have the highest need and opportunity that we want to see development actually take place. And the Economic Justice Index gives some consistency and some understanding to the public as well as the developers and other government officials around how we're prioritizing developments within these various areas and neighborhoods.
Thank you. And Is there a way to see, I think it could be helpful to us as a committee as we move forward, and maybe it is out there and I just don't know. Is there a way to kind of see, I think we talk about all the time like disinvestment and where it happens versus where it doesn't. Is there a map or some type of tool somewhere that kind of shows the city as a whole and the kind of like the different amounts of incentivization that have happened in each area?
Yes, and we're actually working to update our database to be able to more consistently provide that information to the public. And so we are actually upgrading our technology through Salesforce, creating a new platform where developers will go in and upload all of their information as it relates to the community benefits as well as the financial return on the project, so that's transparent to the public. But also, as we incentivize projects across the city, we'll have a map showing where all of the projects that we've incentivized are located and the impact that they've actually driven. That's a long-term goal, is to not just see the outputs of the number of projects, but ultimately the outcomes, like that this actually stimulate other development in the area, that it drive population growth and other key primary goals within the Economic Justice Action Plan.
Okay, and this question I've asked off the record, I'm gonna ask on the record though, for folks at home as well. So there's a lot of emphasis too, I've even found it interesting the way that neighborhood plans can be such an asset. I think there's concerns by a lot of folks in our communities about, putting citizens and what people want for their own communities ahead of, I think neighborhood plans help make sure that the community has identified what they want, and then they, allow all of us to decide development projects based on that. But obviously, every neighborhood does not have, neighborhood plans, and I think that puts them at a disadvantage. I think it might even make our jobs a little bit more harder when we're trying to make sure that it matches up. What are you all doing right now to work on making sure that as many neighborhoods as possible have a neighborhood plan?
So our executive director of the Planning and Urban Design Agency, Don Rowe, they recently issued an RFP to bring in a contractor to advise us on updating our strategic land use plan. So our strategic land use plan is the comprehensive plan for the city of St. Louis. And as every neighborhood are establishing their various neighborhood plans, they have to be incorporated within the strategic land use plan to really be identified as a true plan that has to be recognized by all development agencies and also the developers themselves. So as we're moving through the process of updating the strategic land use plan and also the respective neighborhood plans, we will be able to more readily reflect within our comprehensive plan of the city of St. Louis the type of development that we want to prioritize in the respective areas of our city.
Excellent. Okay. Only two more questions.
Okay.
Okay. In general, if I'm a constituent and I'm at home and I'm concerned about displacement and gentrification, and I hear about this scorecard and all of the economic justice plan, all of the other various things that I know are happening, what would you say to me that's happening that is actively working to make sure that our longtime residents and communities, as we develop and as we grow, we're not going to do it at their expense or their displacement?
Yeah, for sure. So we want to actually reinvest into home repair programs for the residents that currently live in these communities and have lived in these neighborhoods for decades. Also, we have a real estate tax assistance fund that was created to support individuals that are low to moderate income to get access to funds to actually pay off some of their past due taxes, keeping them from ultimately being foreclosed and then taken through the sheriff's sale and then ends up in LRA. We don't want to take those properties away. We want to support those individuals staying in those households. One of the things that I don't think the public recognizes enough is we talk about tax abatement for a lot of these large development projects. A single resident can also apply for tax abatement, and we have a more streamlined process for that resident, and that's why when we capped neighborhood engagement at $1 million, we didn't want to put an additional burden on the average resident that's seeking to freeze their taxes for a period because there is development happening around them that may increase their overall the assessment on their property. And so they have the ability to actually freeze their taxes as development is happening too. So that's another program that we make readily available for residents.
Okay, my last question, this is because I probably have gotten at least I want to say more than 10 emails about this. Can you talk to me about your garden lease policies?
So we have our Director of Real Estate, Mr. Lance Knuckles, so I'll actually pass it over to him if he doesn't mind speaking to this program.
Lance Knuckles, pleasure to be here. Senior Vice President of Neighborhood and Community Transformation, as well as the Director of Real Estate. So the conversation about garden leases, that program was discontinued with another program with the thoughtful intention about ownership. The garden lease program has been used as a tool where folks feel there is ownership in that product, and it isn't. And so we've taken some steps to discontinue that product. And then recently in our last commission meeting, I will be sending out a letter. We have actually taken every parcel that has a garden lease on it out of the inventory for us to do engagement throughout the summer, to then design a product in partnership with community, to then give those leaseholders first right of opportunity to purchase. And if they choose not to purchase, then they'll go back into the standard agreement that they have. But we want to make sure that those who have a garden lease have a pathway to ownership, not leasing. The lease has been the continuous point where folks are growing their gardens to get healthy, and then the real estate gets sold, which is a part of the lease agreement that the parcel can still be sold while it's being in utilization. So we're actively looking to design a new product to create a pathway forward for residents who are currently in a garden lease to be able to have a pathway to purchase.
Okay, so it's kind of in response to, and I've seen that as several times, in response to several like community organizations or neighborhoods owning or leasing, and then there's something happens. And honestly, I've seen you all come and engage the neighborhoods and sometimes encourage the buyer to do elsewhere, but you're trying to eliminate the problem long-term and see if there's a way that they can just own it outright so that it can't like be sold from under them per se.
Well, just for the record, LRA is a part of the environmental justice component of the Economic Justice Action Plan, that not just getting properties back onto the tax roll, but understanding the environmental injustices that have happened. And ownership is one of those pathways, but more importantly, access to green space and growing is actually vital to the economic vitality of North St. Louis. So we do have growers and farmers who are looking to leverage resources, or more importantly, real estate, to become growers at a larger scale that can have benefit from an economic standpoint to North St. Louis. So we want to thoughtfully create a product that would allow them the pathway to that ownership without using the general lot or the square footage price, because that would actually make it inequitable for them to do so.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, great. I wanted to ask Mr. Knuckles, don't sit down, birthday boy. So
Oh, happy
wanted
birthday.
I wanted to just follow up on the question about the neighborhood planners, because I know they're under your direction. There's a question about that. After that, I want to go ahead and publicly again thank all the members of the St. Louis Development Corporation that took the time out today to come to this meeting. I would like for them to be introduced by name, not just for us, that so we can show the public that, again, they've been here the whole time listening, ready to answer questions, as a definitely a public showing of how we are working in partnership, as Director Neal said, with the HUD's Committee and SLDC and moving development forward. So I'll start off with the question, because I kind of feel like we've had two different questions asked on different sides of that about the responsiveness of neighborhood, what are they called,
They're called neighborhood managers.
Then these neighborhood managers, what is the responsiveness? And I've been in meetings where that question has been asked as well. I also would like for you to answer publicly what the relationship is supposed to be, or what your vision of the relationship was with an alderperson and a neighborhood director, so that the public can know that as well, because some of the public, I think, have called on us like, where is your neighborhood planner, or what is your neighborhood planner doing? And I you know, the situation with my neighborhood planner, so I don't know how to respond to say they don't report to me, they report to you. So if you can make a public response to that, please.
Alderwoman, I definitely can, Council. So again, Lance Knuckles, honored to be here. Neighborhood managers are actually overseen by my senior neighborhood manager, Andrew Turnage. And so as we move forward, he will be actually in my stead, if you will, answering these kind of questions as he continues to take reins of this team as they grow and develop. But I'll actually be able to communicate and respond to that. I think neighborhood managers, Mr. Richardson's done a phenomenal job identifying kind of the role. I would actually give it a little different context, is that neighborhood managers are the center of the hourglass. On one side is city departments and other access points to government and opportunities in the city, and then the other side is community, and their real function is to be able to communicate between both and working in support of, I want to be really clear, working in support of our aldermanic leaders to find opportunities and tools that support economic development and the revitalization of neighborhoods in which you all service. And so the responsiveness can happen very different ways. I know I have one neighborhood manager who was solely tasked to execute the small business grant program, which we're super excited to describe and inform the community that we've actually dispersed $4.5 million to 900 small businesses, with 80% of those dollars going into HUD qualified census tracts across the city. And so he is now beginning to reactivate himself in a very different way to be able to be in the neighborhoods that he's responsible for building that relationship with. But I would say that ongoing, it is about working in concert. Neighborhood managers are not necessarily the team that is trying to replace our neighborhood stabilization managers or neighborhood improvement specialists. They work in concert. I can tell you a number of times where we've been in meetings where they work hand in hand. One is addressing the livability issues, which is more on the neighborhood improvement specialists, and the neighborhood manager is really addressing the things around economic vitality and supporting the businesses accessing programs and products. As you all know, neighborhood managers are also a key point of making sure the products and programs that we develop and design at SODC, as we move forward, they are the point of the spear, if you will, making sure businesses have access to those products as we move forward. So I think that's really how we want to have the neighborhood managers be a supportive partner to all the aldermanic leaders across the city.
Thank you so much. All right, and if you want to make the introductions.
Great, now you're really testing me here, because we have a lot of staff. So we have Madeline from the incentives team, Zach from the incentives team, and then Andrew, who you all heard from today, and then Zach and Jake, and then Rob Orr, which is our Senior Vice President of our Equitable and Inclusive Development. We have Corinne, who's one of our neighborhood managers. We have Ms. Kelly King, our Director of Human Resources. Then you all heard from the birthday boy, Mr. Lance Knuckles, as well as our Senior Neighborhood Manager, Mr. Andrew Turnage.
All right.
I think I got everybody right.
Thank you all so much for being here. I do understand the immeasurable amounts of work that go into these development processes, before it gets to us, before it gets to be in these positions right here. So I just, again, want to thank you. Thank you all for taking the time out today here to be available for questions. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, we'll just go ahead with Board Bill 37. I'm going to have to step on the other side here, so I am going to turn it over to our Vice Chair, Sanye.
Hello again, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Afternoon.
Would you like us to start with the reading of a summary of the bill?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Please, Clerk.
Board Bill number 37, introduced by Alderwoman Shameen Clark Hubbard. An ordinance revising and amending ordinance number 71504, which created North St. Louis small business and nonprofit grant programs, clarifying eligibility for such grant programs, eligible uses for funds available through such grant programs, and how the St. Louis Development Corporation will access applications for and make awards for such grant programs, ensuring such grant programs are administered consistent with relevant federal requirements, and removing barriers and addressing other issues impacting implementation of these grant programs.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So I want to make sure, again, for the public and everybody who might be listening or might be new, you know a little bit about the history of this legislation and the integrity and the spirit behind this legislation. So Board Bill 82 was introduced on 7/9/21. It was heard twice in committee. As is today, I'm not asking for a vote, I'm just opening up the conversation. It passed out on its second hearing, and then it went to be finally passed on April the 18th with 24 aye votes, no votes. And Mayor Jones signed it into into law on 5/5/2022. After that, we had a press conference at an amazing appliance store right at the corner of Taylor and Martin Luther King that was well attended in North St. Louis. Again, reimagining what we can do to build up business back into North St. Louis, to re-put these funds back into North St. Louis. But in the midst of that, right, we began to see some challenges, barriers, inequities that began to be revealed in the process. And so, again, behind me, I have with me our director, Neil Richardson, our Nance Knuckles, and also Casey Milberg from the administration, from the mayor's administration, because they did work together with the president of the Board of Aldermen, myself, and others to make sure that we cleared up. I know it's been called fixes, but what we did to make sure that this money can be, again, keep the intentional effort that was collectively put forth to award these funds, but also make it pass, the but-for test that we were talking about, the different things that caused us to be able to hold it back. And so, one of my constituents this morning just called me and told me about making sure that we look at stuff as how to instead of not to. And for me, it's always been and not or. And so that's why I am coming to you all today for questions. I also reached out to some of our other colleagues to see if they had any questions. It's most especially the colleagues in North St. Louis, because the intentional, again, effort and spirit behind the vision of this bill and what it could do to reimagine development and revitalization in North St. Louis. I want to make sure, along with the others that worked on this, that integrity was kept, right? So, I know that sometimes we can get distracted by some of the misinformation that's spread, but I wanted to make sure that the history of this was conveyed once again as we move forward on it. And they've both been sworn in. I don't know if we need to swear in Ms. Billenberg. If any of my colleagues might have any questions for her, I'm here to answer any questions. And then again, not asking for a vote today, just wanted your thoughts. And then as we move forward to hopefully carry out a vote, the main thing I don't want, you heard the timeline. This has been going on since July of 21. We're going on July of 23. And there are people that have applications in. There are businesses that have been waiting and counting on the opportunity to be able to get this money to build or revitalize their business that they have hung on to, not to mention that was during the pandemic, right? So the thought that anything would try to be in the way of moving this and doing it in the spirit is a little disheartening. And the thought that we would try to redirect it in any kind of way, not intentionally. I know we're all down here to advocate on our constituencies and advocate on our neighborhoods, but again, the spirit of this one, right, which is not an or, it's an and we know that they deserve it, is where Board Bill 37 has come from. So with that, I'd like to call them up with me to the podium and also have Ms. Milberg come on, just in case you have any questions. Go ahead and swear her in so we can move forward with that portion.
Okay, we can do the swearing in.
Okay. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, we'll just go in order of seniority. Alderman Cone.
Thank you. So this board bill, as it was I guess the ordinance, I should say, as it was originally written, was targeted towards specific commercial corridors, and then the intent of this board bill is to broaden the geographic area that would be eligible for these funds.
That's one of the thing, if we were gonna call them fixes, yes, that was one of the fixes, because that was one of the barriers that stood in place with some of during the application processes.
Did we get applications from outside of the initial corridors?
Alderman, there are applications from across North City, whereas there was a component around community needs that was defined within the first legislation that was really convoluted but we do have some applications, and majority of those applications are not directly on a specific corridor.
But the original ordinance was for specific corridors.
That is correct.
So we're saying there are applications, but a majority of those applications are not for those corridors.
So the original bill was identified where the commercial corridors were the primary locations.
Right.
The notion of allowing other neighborhoods to participate and have access, the language around community need was leveraged, that if a corridor passed through a neighborhood that was adjacent to that corridor, then that neighborhood would become eligible to secure funds if the business met a community need. Again, it was a little convoluted, but it was there.
So with the new language, and I presume we're going to have a committee substitute for this because the board bill that was introduced is not in our typical format.
Yeah, yes, there'll be a committee substitute next week, but it's not that, it is in a different format, and we have a clean copy that I can share with you too, but we submitted it a little too late to get it in for the committee sub today, so it'll be as a committee sub next week, but it's still the same thing, it's just in a clean copy.
Right, yeah, okay, this is I'm looking at a red line version, so it has the original.
Which, some people appreciate it because they were able to see, well, thank you, Ms. Milberg. Looks like she has some clean copies printed out, but some people took advantage of that, to your point, to see the direct changes and the direct, again, if we're going to use the word fixes that we made.
So I'm just going through the I guess, proposed changes. So while we're doing this, it looks like we're using two different metrics. One is the qualified HUD census tracts, and one is the EGI, or EJI. I keep saying EJ and GI. It just flows off the tongue easier. So with the EJI, it's areas 1 and 2 of the EJI, and then HUD qualified census tracts north of Del Mar. All of it's north of Del Mar. So why, if we're taking this opportunity, I mean, looking at the economic justice report, specifically as it pertains to areas 1 and 2, it notes that those areas have seen the same level of disinvestment as North St. Louis. So why would we not take the opportunity to also open that up to areas that are EJI 1 and 2?
I'll speak first to how it was explained to me, because I did ask that question after you and I's conversation, Alderman Cone. And what was told to me was that, again, the original intent, even in the name of this legislation, was what we were trying to adhere to, 24, making sure that we kept that spirit of that bill that we all worked together to pass within the last 2 years, and we're trying to make sure that we got that message over to North St. Louis, that we want to intentionally reinvest into them. Now, what I was told, and I'm sure you're aware of this too, that, again, when I spoke about the and not the or, is that there are several other products that came out of the ARPA funding, out of the funding that we have in the city right now, that are citywide, and that right now, to this day, that are still open for accessibility, that are citywide. But this one, again, the intent of this one being north and North St. Louis was why it was explained to me, and I understood that we kept it for Board Bill 37, and I'll let them explain it.
Yes, Alderman Cone, you spoke correctly, is that there's been some definitely disinvestment happening in areas of South St. Louis City, specifically Dutchtown and Gravois Park. However, the spirit of this original legislation was focused on corridors that were north of Del Mar. What we've seen in North City is a significant decline in population loss. Over the last 10 years, we lost over 17,000 residents, and 27,000 residents actually were Black families, and the majority of those were from North St. Louis City. In order to see development come back and to ultimately achieve our goal of increasing population as well as improving our overall tax base, We believe investing in North St. Louis City, specifically along those commercial corridors to drive economic development activity, will help us achieve those goals of improving the tax base as well as growing our population, which has a positive impact on our entire city, not just those areas in which we are investing, but we are prioritizing these investments in those areas that we've seen a significant population decline, but also as the spirit of this program is set out to address the commercial corridors that are north of Delmar as laid out within the title of this legislation.
So what am I supposed to tell a neighborhood business owner, minority business owner down in Gravois Park on Chippewa that has a 30% vacancy rate, that has homicides once a month, drive-by shootings every day, and has the same issues with getting access to capital as any business that might be opening north of Delmar?
Yeah.
I mean, whether that's, lack of, institutional wealth that's been built up through their family, lack of access to capital through banks because the banks don't lend very well in communities that continue to suffer from, I'll call it repressed property prices and things of that nature. And, vacancy, is a challenge in some of those commercial corridors as well. So what am I supposed to tell the members of my community that would want access to this type of capital as well?
Alderwoman Hubbard spoke to it perfectly. This is not an either-or conversation. This is a both-and. And
Right, and I'm missing that
right.
both
Well,
and.
I'm getting to that point. And when I say that, we've had over $250 million that's been committed to the Economic Justice Action Plan in partnership with the Board of Aldermen and the Mayor's administration around ensuring that we are strategic on how we leverage the entire set of resources that we've received. And a portion of the resources, the $37 million that's within this bill, is targeted towards North St. Louis City. But overall, within SLDC specifically, we have over $112 million that's within our stewardship that hits the entire city. It's citywide. We've developed in housing development programs such as with Habitat for Humanity and Dashtown and Gravois Park to ensure that they're providing for-sale home ownership opportunities for those at 80% AMI or below. We have a down payment assistance program that will provide up to $50,000 for individuals that are 80% AMI and below across the entire city to actually get access to home ownership. We've recently received approval for our revolving loan fund as well as our minority and supplier loan fund to ensure that businesses that within the entire city have access to capital, working with fund managers, working with financial institutions to create products, programs, and initiatives that target workforce development and access to capital for these businesses is paramount for us. And this is not just geared towards North St. Louis City. All of the programs I've mentioned have a priority on our EJI 1 and EJI 2 areas. But this particular legislation is geared towards providing $37 million to North St. Louis specifically, and that's being strategic because I see we allocated all the resources there, but we did not. We were very thoughtful around the dollar amount that we wanted to put in North St. Louis City versus the other areas. And we are ensuring that they still have access to capital. They're getting the resources that they need. As Mr. Knuckles spoke to earlier, we have provided over 900 businesses with $5,000 grants. That's $4.5 million. And the majority of those were across all of St. Louis City in our qualified census tracts, not just North St. Louis City. So there's been access to resources and grant programs and other loan programs that SLDC has rolled out, and also with our partnership with the Community Development Administration, they recently released a $20 million NOFA, and that was not just geared towards North St. Louis City. That was for the entire city, focusing on Economic Justice Index areas 1 and 2. And so I understand for this particular program, it's not for all of St. Louis City, but all of our economic justice efforts which is why we created the plan, is to ensure that we're addressing all of the needs that we need to ensure that everybody has equitable access to capital, equitable access to be able to achieve their fullest economic potential, and ultimately improving our tax base and growing our city's population. And that's why these resources, this set of resources specifically, this $37 million out of the almost $500 million that we received as a city is focused on North St. Louis City.
Well, so this was actually one of the first allocations that was made out of the first tranche of money. That was about $250 million that came into the city back in 2021. To be clear.
Yep.
And it wasn't the administration that put that forward. It was President Lewis Reed and Alderman Jeffrey Boyd at that point in time, who famously did not have a good relationship with the administration. So, you know, and they did so for specific commercial corridors. They did not do so for the benefit of all of North St. Louis. They did so for specific commercial corridors. I understand the intent behind it, but I keep hearing, you know, for the benefit of everyone, and, you know, and not or, you know, solve both. But that's not what this is doing. This is still kind of othering the communities of color, the communities that have been disadvantaged, the immigrant communities that call Southeast City home, and, you know, continue to face a lot of the same challenges that our neighbors in North St. Louis have to deal with. And I find it disingenuous when we say that, you know, we want to take care of everyone, but then you expect me to vote for something that's not taking care of everyone, who are literally, if you look at the maps, if you look at the data, if you look at any other measurement, are dealing with almost the same. And your economic justice report even identifies it as much as that EJI 1 classification. So it just seems, while we're taking the opportunity to be fair, to be equitable, to change the dynamic here, that we would be more considerate of those other communities that have had to face the disinvestment, have had to face the population decline, have had to face limitations on their accessibility to economic justice. And it's very frustrating sitting here listening to that, to be honest. I understand that there are other programs that are out there, but North St. Louis is also eligible for those, are they not?
Yes, they are. That's correct.
Right. I mean, just to quote the economicjusticestl.org, other pockets falling in EJI 1 or EGI 2 on the Economic Justice Index, noting high need and opportunity, are located in South St. Louis and Graveway Park, Dutchtown, and Marine Villa. These areas share many of the same characteristics as those of high need in North St. Louis, and should also be a priority focus area for SLDC.
And they
Quote,
are.
unquote.
Yeah, and they are a priority area. I mean, as you've seen through the incentive process that we've just spoke to, the EJI 1 and 2 areas both get high consideration for incentives. Also, within North St. Louis City, there's a high level of concentrated poverty along everywhere north of Delmar. Wait 1 second. And what we want to see is to address that concentrated poverty of bringing back resources to North St. Louis and repair the harm that was caused by the disinvestment that happened there with this particular set of resources. I think if you bifurcate this out and look solely at this program, it is geared toward North St. Louis City. But as a city, we have to be very strategic on how we allocate all of our resources. And what I would say is that we're looking at doing that in an equitable way, in an equitable manner. Again, SLDC does not create legislation. We are responsible for implementing. We are the executive, we work within the executive branch in partnership with the mayor's office to ensure that we're implementing the priorities and the resources that we have and doing it in the most equitable manner. Again, the legislative piece is a determination by the Board of Aldermen ultimately, and you all set the vision and the framework for how we execute. While I understand your concerns, SLDC is here to speak on behalf of how we actually implement the program in which it was presented to us to be able to implement.
I hear that.
Okay.
You all are also guiding the philosophy of development throughout the city. And, I mean, to suggest that $37 million is enough to turn the tide in North St. Louis or anywhere else in the city is, I mean, $37 million does not go very far.
Exactly. And so I think being able to grow that amount, saying we want to spread that $37 million, not just in a concentrated area, but across the entire city, I think it takes away from us trying to address.
I'm not suggesting spreading it across the entire city.
Again, expanding the area into South St. Louis City based on, as we're guiding development and development policy, we see that there's a high need of concentrated focus on investment in those commercial corridors of north of St. Louis, of Del Mar.
I mean, Director Richardson, my suggestion, instead of including HUD qualified census tracts, and instead of including EJI-1, EJI-2, would be to concentrate the money in an area, in a larger but more focused area such as EJI-1. It's your highest ranked priority area for economic justice impact. Just looking at the map that you have available online, that is roughly, an area that includes the Ville, St. Louis Place, includes Dr. Martin Luther King Drive, Jeff Vanderloo, Lewis Place, Fountain Park, Hamilton Heights, and then a very, very, very small portion of Gravois Park and Dutchtown. To me, $37 million is not a lot of money with respect to the potential for impact here. And if we're going to try to prioritize areas that have seen that level of disinvestment, why wouldn't we focus on those areas that are ranked highest on the EJI? Instead of opening it up to I mean, there are areas in North St. Louis that don't rank as highly on the EJI as certain areas in Dutchtown or Gravois Park, but they would remain eligible for it, even though they rank lower underneath the legislation as it's suggested. So why would an area that's ranked lower on the EJI be qualified for the $37 million? Baden.
Again, Again, it's about us following SLDC, from SLDC's perspective, following the legislation. The spirit of the legislation was around investing in North St. Louis City. What we've recommended is ways in which we can implement and move more efficiently to achieve those goals of driving investment north of Del Mar, as well as being able to invest and continue to see areas grow over time in North St. Louis City. Just because the area is an EJI-2 does not mean that it's stable. We want to see commercial corridors begin to have an impact, not just on the businesses that are along those corridors, but also the residential space, having a positive impact on the other resources that meet community needs, from healthcare to childcare and other resources. So we want to see a mix of those community needs be able to grow in North St. Louis City, and that's what we see as the spirit of the legislation that has been presented in front of us.
So this was introduced during an election cycle, and frankly, there were a lot of politics involved in it when it was originally introduced. And, I think what's fair to be said here is that there is a greater need than what is available for the city as a whole, even for the area that is identified in this reappropriation board bill here, my ask, which I still haven't had an answer to, what am I supposed to tell that business owner on Chippewa?
And we have resources to support them. We have, again, the small business revolving funds. We have the $20 million NOFA that just was released.
But when they ask me why I vote yes on a $37 million appropriation,
because it's for the betterment of our city. It improves our overall tax base. It has an impact on an area of our city that have seen population decline and vacancy. So again,
Gravois Park, population decline,
But
Gravois
you're
Park,
at-
property value decline, Gravois Park, crime higher than almost any other part of the city.
Understood, but we also have other programs targeted for that. It's not a taking away, giving something in North City isn't taking something away from South St. Louis City. It's about allocating our resources in a way in which we lift everybody up. And I believe
To identify, your organization went through a process to identify, the administration went through a process to identify what its priorities are. Doing something like this seems like it's in direct conflict with what those priorities are.
I would disagree.
So when you have, how is it that you can have an area that's identified as EJ1 that's not eligible for something that other areas that are EJI1 are eligible for?
I just want to interject just a little bit here, just to bring us back in to not take away from this conversation that I know you all have had. This is a continued conversation. And just for clarity for people that are watching, SLDC did not come up with a $37 million number.
Correct.
We did, as a board, that we all voted on. Back when we did this and when we all voted on this, and you can run, all of our meetings, just like today is being recorded, all of our past meetings are recorded, you can run the tapes. When we all agreed on this and we talked in conversation about this, EJI was not in place. Thank you for the work you all have done with that. Thank you for the work you all have done with that. But what they were doing, which I think was conveyed also earlier in the meeting, when they talked about the role that SLDC plays with us, it is following our direction. So Alderman Cone, our direction was given, and they have, again, used the buzzword fixed some of the barriers, the challenges that were in the direction that we had given. All of us stood, all of us voted on in line with a commitment to North St. Louis, to your point, a nominal commitment, but it was a commitment that they could believe in and they could have hope in. But again, this was not what their idea, right? As a matter of fact, this was in place when they came, and they were really thrown off the porch with it. That's why they didn't have a plan when we first did it, and that's why now one of the things that has changed, and one of the things I think we need to keep in mind of on timelines, is that they will be ready. They have stood this program up, and it'll be ready day one when we pass it to get these funds moving and on the ground to these businesses. But I want to make sure in the dialogue that people know that they did not come up for our new colleagues, that SLDC did not come up with the $37 million. The Board of Aldermen at the time followed the direction of the president and our own hearts and minds of how we wanted to be committed to North St. Louis and make a commitment to North St. Louis, which was at the time one of the reasons why we got the allotment that we did. From the ARPA fund, of ARPA funding, and that's where this came from. And Alderman Cone, again, circling back to, it's our direction, right? So I'm so glad, this is why I wanted to have a conversation, right, first, and have questions answered. If it's your, what's the word I want to use? Not mission, because we are all down here on a mission, but if it's what you want to do is to try and take this in a different direction than what it was and work with us as your colleagues. We all play the same role on this board, right? And we're all down here to fight for our communities, right? And I respect that, and you know that. So I just didn't want it to go too far off into, again, making it seem like SLDC did anything nefarious or anything against any part of the city of St. Louis, because I believe in the work that they're doing for the entire city of St. Louis. And with that, I want to make sure we just stay on questioning, on a road of questioning on Board Bill 37 as now, which is not a reappropriation. It's something that was already passed. last year, I'm sorry, back in 2022, it was passed and signed, and we were moving forward as a board collectively with this commitment to North St. Louis. And again, it's a moving part. So if we're having a discussion, I would like to hear from, all of our other colleagues and see how we can work collectively to, again, get this money moving, because they are ready now more than ever to make this, to get these funds allocated.
So, thank you, Alderwoman, and I know you and I have had many conversations, and, I consider you a great friend and a great leader, and, respect you very much. And I respectfully, with regard to the original ordinance, I have to go back to, this was originally introduced by the President of the Board of Aldermen and the Chairman of HUDs at the time, and it was done so during an election season, and frankly, with not great conversation with respect to how the funds would be administered, with respect to any of the program dialogue that would happen. That came up in conversation during committee and on the floor of the Board of Aldermen. It passed because, specifically because there was a commitment to North St. Louis and these specific corridors. But now this language is opening that up to areas that are HUD qualified census tracts or with an EJI 1 or EJI 2. That's much different than saying Dr. Martin Luther King, North Grand. So if we're going to take that step and provide those individuals and those businesses the same opportunities outside of those corridors, then why wouldn't we do that and take that same opportunity to provide minority businesses or other businesses that, are in economically disadvantaged areas of this city the same opportunity?
So that very question, I think you kind of answered your own question, because the reason we opened it up, the corridors, and for clarity, the corridors are not taken out. The corridors are still in there. And the applications that are in place are still in there, ready to go, right? But there was some discussions around, and I just learned this word yesterday. He don't know, he taught me this word yesterday in one of my many meetings about this, but bifurcate, am I pronouncing it? Bifurcating these corridors, right? And so just making it equitable and accessible to, again, the title of the bill, the title of the legislation was why they had to legally open it back up and expand that geography the way that they could. And that's where that came from. It wasn't taking away the corridors. It wasn't taking away the integrity of the revitalization vision for North St. Louis for these funds. And I'm not really sure the direction of saying what some of the timelines of when it was introduced and what they had to do with it. I don't care if it was an election season. I don't care if somebody was having a baby or somebody was buying a house. I don't care really what was going on. Whatever time of day it is, I think that we all have a commitment to our neighborhoods. We all have a commitment to securing resources for our neighborhoods. And so for me, even though sometimes it's passed around that I'm not a North Side alder, I absolutely consider myself a North Side alder. And so I'm always going to fight for North Side resources. And so with that being said, again, that's what this one was for. And if redirecting would be if we did change it, take North Side out of it, take North Side corridor, take North Side grant, take however you want to do that. That would be redirecting it or reallocating it. But this right here is keeping the integrity, the vision, the spirit of what those alders, us alders, came together in for the legislation that was formerly Board Bill 82 as amended, and what will now be Board Bill 37 committee sub as amended, whatever, because this is part of the process, right? But I just want to make sure that the new alders understand that part, that this, again, is not taking away from what we did back then together collectively as a board. It's adding to it.
Alderman Connor, I'll let you respond to Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, and then.
I'm done.
Okay.
We're not taking a vote on this today,
Yeah,
so I'm
that's what I was
not,
gonna say. We could continue
the
I'm
conversation.
fine continuing the conversation, when we have a
Well-
committee substitute before us, but, you know, I would just ask respectfully, you know, that we don't leave out neighbors who are experiencing the same challenges that other communities are as well, so.
Okay,
Thank you.
Alderman Browning.
On a slightly more just nitpicky note, and this is from the red line copy, page 6, line 18 to 19. It notes the Page Avenue corridor, says it runs from Vanderbilt to Compton, but Page doesn't actually intersect with Compton, and it intersects with MLK, so might just want to clarify that in the language. Another consideration on page 12, line 3, considers changing the word entrepreneurs to recipients. There are some recipients that are not going to be entrepreneurs. I think that would just be a better word to use there. I have a question about page 9, line 9. It says, let me bring it up here. Line 9. The reference to community support. It says impact will be based on community support. I was wondering how that is determined. What qualifies community support, and yeah, how is that being measured?
Right, I'll let them speak to that, but it, you know, that was one of the things that came out of Board Bill 64 as amended.
That's a great question, and it's not defined in there for a reason. It could be a letter of support. For example, the original bill made it optional for there to be a demonstration of community input. Given that that particular grant does have community need and the title is at least partially based upon community need, it seems important to actually enforce that piece of it. We'd be very open to discussing if there's any preferences you might have about what could, you know, constitute community support, but right now it's pretty broadly worded. It could be, again, you know, a letter from, you know, a neighborhood association. It could be a letter, you know, different letters from neighbors. It could be even, you know, an aldermanic letter of support for that matter. So yeah, I would be very open to having a conversation if there's any thoughts about, you know, what you'd like to see that further defined as, or if you're comfortable leaving it open-ended.
Okay, and speaking of aldermanic letters of support, a good revision in this is that it does away with the requirement for an aldermanic letter of support. I think that's a really positive thing. But my question is, how does SLDC weigh an application with aldermanic letters? What kind of weight does that play into it? And if an alder doesn't support the project, is there a way that the application can still be approved by SLDC even if it's a viable project?
Alderman Browning, great question. I think as we continue to finalize selection criteria as the legislation moves, it's our understanding to make sure that aldermanic support, whether it's up or down, is considered as a contextual review. Understanding that aldermanic leaders do have an awareness and understanding of their ward, but in the context of maybe the service or the program, the objective nature of that letter is really what's being kept in consideration around, is it objective or subjective based upon the support or non-support.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. And
Also, I want to note that, thank you, Alderman Browning, that did, one of the things that came out of Board Bill 64 is amended, and that it didn't take, I know there's some misinformation that this took away the letter. It didn't take away the letter. It actually even added 2 other options to the letter. So it's saying in support, non-support, or you just, you know, you don't believe in it. You know, just different options for us to have as older people, our voice heard in the process, but not get caught up in a situation where, and we've all heard about these situations where maybe an amazing company, an amazing constituent that's doing some great work doesn't have a relationship with their older person, you know, and unfortunately, so they're not awarded a letter or not offered an opportunity to have the support of their older person. So that's where this came from, and we think that it's, again, another good fix.
yeah, I do think that's a real positive because, as you say, there are plenty of people in the city who are doing great things that might not have that political connection. Will there be a portal on the SLDC website to show who's receiving the grants and how much, similar to the ARPA grant portal?
So, Alderman Browning, yes, there will be, as we develop the accelerator for SLDC, all the products and programs that we offer, we will have a dashboard on those programs or any recipient that moves forward. And we'll also make the selection criteria be available as well once they're finalized post-legislation by this body and the Board of Aldermen.
Okay, thank you. I had no more questions.
Okay, I don't have, I think my questions have already been answered. I just want to thank you for doing the work, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, to amend the bill and bring it about, and thank you for the context that you provided, and thank Alderman Cone too. I think robust conversation and discussions is good, and I think this is not the first time we've heard just some of these conversations and some of the things to consider, so I think it's always to the advantage for everyone to hear it. Since you're not calling it up for a vote today, I think we can, just wrap up this portion of our meeting.
Right, I just asked that us as the HUD's committee and then with our colleagues for the rest of the board, as we all play the same role, and not in only this piece of legislation, but all of our legislation, that we have open communication and dialogue about this as we move forward, factually and not emotionally, and not on social media, but with each other. Thank you so much.
Agreed. You're welcome.
Go through the rest of it. Okay. With that, we will move into our agenda. We had a resolution, but I think that we are all on same accord. Does anybody have anything they would like to discuss about item number one? I'm sorry, not item number one, but the resolution. I don't see it on the agenda, but if you remember, it was assigned to committee. It should be in the Google Drive. It was the resolution on the, yeah, it's not on the agenda, but we did have that, it was a resolution for review that was assigned to the committee. Yes. Okay. Well, I know it was assigned, so we'll maybe revisit that. I apologize for that. We don't have any other announcements? No. Okay. All right, everyone was present for our HUD's meeting today, so with that, I will accept the motions for adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconds.
Yes, Roll, thank you all.